And welcome once again to Living in the 21st Century. Joining me today is Robert Nichols from Boston Realty Group. Robert, it's a pleasure to have you on again.
It's a pleasure to be on.
Yes, it's like almost 2 years since COVID-19 put everything to a halt that we haven't spoke.
Yeah, no, it's been crazy. Absolutely.
Yes. I see a lot going on in the real estate world now. Every place I turn, I see some monsters for apartment buildings setting up. I often wonder how is the domestic aspect of it doing in terms of people getting their houses sold and so forth, buyers market, etc.
So, Errol, I'll tell you, it's been, quite the journey. During COVID, initially I anticipated that we were going to go into a recession, and how wrong was I on that? We've seen real estate values trend up tremendously, 20+%, 2019 to 2020. We also saw even year to date now over $6 billion worth of real estate is sold just in Boston alone from January until the end of September. And so the market is in a frenzy. It's extremely competitive, and still it's the same issues we faced before. If you're looking to buy, not enough inventory. And so with that said, I think for the foreseeable future, even going into next year, with the high cost of development, it's very hard for lots of developers to continue to build and justify the cost. So I think inventory is going to be an ongoing issue for some time until the commodity pricing comes down. And then I think we have to be very cautious on rates. I think when rates go up, that's when I think buyers will start to kind of pull back. But that has not happened yet. It's been a crazy journey, and as of right now, I think most analysts, Zillow, Goldman Sachs, and many others are predicting double-digit increases in the housing market for 2022.
Yes, I heard during this COVID time, believe it or not, that it was like an economic stimulus. Yes, people did lose their jobs and we had all these deaths and so forth, but for some reasons, quite a few billionaires were added to the billionaire line. Companies were doing well. So to some degree, it has its pros and it has its cons. And one of the things, though, I really want to ask, with so many people out of work, how many of them now are qualifying to purchase homes?
That's a great question, Ross. So I will say that, many folks and many lenders understand we went through a tumultuous time with COVID. And so as a result of that, there are certain programs. If you become reemployed, let's say you were furloughed or laid off, many lenders will work with you on that. As long as you return back to work and you're in the same industry and you had really no lapse in income. Right. Job security is everything when it comes to getting financing. So I think as more and more people return to the labor force, they will qualify to buy homes. But also, I think with just rates being low, more and more people will opt to buy versus rent. And with a lack of inventory being out there, even if, let's say, we don't have as many buyers, I had a situation a couple weeks back where one of my friends, I was trying to help them acquire a home in Quincy, Massachusetts. Mm-hmm. And this particular home was only on the market for 3 days. And within 3 days, they had an offer deadline on Monday. They put it on Friday, Saturday, Sunday. 27 offers were submitted. My client was $50,000 above asking price. It was only listed for $399, and they still didn't get it. And so I think that speaks to the strength of the market from the perspective of even despite many folks maybe not qualifying or opting to rent and opting to wait, there is still enough buyers out there who do qualify that will, be competitive and aggressively bid on these homes that they want.
Yeah, there were certain parts of the nation where we found that a lot of people had been thrown out of their homes because they couldn't afford a mortgage because some of them were out of work. And in a result of that, it somewhat had an impact on mortgages, so to speak, in terms of people qualifying to buy homes. So what I'm trying to say here is that you had folks out there before who were barely on the qualifying line to have access to a home. And now, with COVID came into place, many people then were thrown out of their homes. So it means the bank are no longer collecting mortgage rates from these home owners. How basically did, I'm trying to phrase this question correctly, how basically did the real estate market become fruitful to the point where there is still this big elevation in sales?
So I think, great question, Aral. I think that one of the things that helped kind of stave off a crash or a recession was the fact that the federal government basically banned foreclosures and allowed people to freeze their mortgage payments for some time. And so, many folks did it for a full year. Some folks are still within that, and others have come out of it. And at the same time, many states and jurisdictions stop foreclosures. And so while folks may not have paid, I think there is a looming issue coming on the horizon where there are going to be a lot of folks who end up getting foreclosed on are going to have to figure some things out. And that will obviously lead to more homes getting on the market and, or force banks to try to work things out with homeowners. So I think that's one of the things I'd say that has kind of staved off a crash is the fact that most banks and lenders are working with homeowners to either do a loan modification or give them an extra time to figure out how to make payments. But one key thing as well, Oral, is in the climate we're in, even people facing foreclosure have equity. And it's unprecedented. We've helped many distressed homeowners over the years through short sales and loan mods. But right now what's happening is if someone has to, they just cannot pay and they have to leave, they actually can sell their home for a profit. And so I think when the market shifts, that's when we're going to be in trouble, because these same people will no longer be able to do that. And we're going to see a return to short sales, and we're also going to receive a return to loan modifications. But as of right now, the banks have been more flexible. And then more importantly, the most distressed homeowners actually have equity in their home. So that's really what's created this high elevation in the real estate market.
Right. So those people who own multifamily homes and apparently was relying on tenants to pay their rents. When Trump was in power, he said to these people, don't pay any rent. He asked the homeowners to basically give them a time to relax themselves from paying their rents and so forth. And even though he had called on the banks to be patient with some of these homeowners, the banks weren't always favorable in doing that. They didn't live up to their expectation, right, even though they would have get a whole ton of money from bailouts from the government, when I think probably they still didn't even need it. And in a result of that, you had landlords perishing, and some of them lose their homes. Now, with that kind of activity going on, I often wonder, where do people or landlords in this case benefit? How do they really wriggle out of that? On one hand, the government is saying to the banks, go easy on these people, work with them. And the banks, probably they had 60 or 70% of their mortgage paid off. But the bank is probably saying, well, you know what? If you foreclose on this house, this has a lot of equity inside of it. Where do that leave the landlord?
Another great question, Aral. So we saw firsthand many landlords suffered during the pandemic because of this. There were many tenants who abused the system and didn't pay, and it created a hardship. I was one of those landlords. I had one tenant in particular who gamed the system. Mm-hmm. She was a difficult tenant prior to COVID, and then when COVID hit, it was just that quick excuse that allowed her to feel justified in not paying. And so, we worked through it. This was in one of my buildings. It was 6 units there. With the other 5 tenants, we were blessed that they were great. They paid. We had half of that building as Section 8. And so as a result of that, 3 of the tenants, their rents were fine. The other 2, they figured out a way to make it work. And then we just had 1 that we had to carry for some time. But you're correct. There are many landlords who were really harmed by this in the short run. Some were forced to sell their buildings. Others were forced to work things out with their lenders. Now, here's the damage there was their credit. These landlords, their credit definitely took a hit when they were behind on these payments. And, I think, typically foreclosures take anywhere from the time you stop making a payment until the time the bank actually takes the home, minimum 6 months, but in this environment, at least a year. And so that obviously is not the best of news. However, many landlords were able to stabilize their assets within the 12-month period so that they did not actually end up getting foreclosed on.
Right.
It did create some temporary hardship, but the rental market, for the most part, has recovered. I do have landlords now I speak to in the city and work with some of my friends who their rents have never gotten back to where they were in 2019 or the beginning of 2020, pre-COVID, but they're at a place where they can comfortably afford to carry their homes and continue to now kind of build their income back up slowly but surely. And I predict by the end of 2022, barring any crazy changes in the market, the rents will fully recover by then. But that's one of the areas that has not recovered yet, and landlords are feeling that pain in the short run right now.
Okay. One of the things I'm concerned about, though, do you think that there should be laws of in which how landlords are treated, especially here in the state of Massachusetts? Whereas you got tenants who messed up, they don't want to pay, and it's hard to get them out of your house because winter is around the corner, and they prolong, you get called, maybe back into late summer again, and the law seems to be giving them this long enduring time before you can expel them out of your house. And the landlords are faced there with this issue. Now, I know there are a lot of people out there who want to buy homes, multifamily homes, and use part of their homes as rental, as a way and a source of paying back the bank their mortgage when the month comes. But you have a lot of tenants who are not doing their due diligence, and a result of that, you have the landlords suffering the consequences. Now, don't you think it's time the courts or the government just make some policy that works in favor both for the landlord and the tenants?
Absolutely, Raul. So I will say this. Massachusetts is a tenants' rights state, meaning tenants have more rights than the landlords in a landlord-tenant
Right.
law. Other states like Providence or Rhode Island, other states like Rhode Island, I had a 4-family during COVID down there where I had some tenants who tried to game the system. And fortunately for me as a landlord, I was able to go through the legal process and evict them at that time. And again, they had not paid for a good 6 months for no reason other than the fact that they just didn't want to pay. And so I was supported by Providence and the municipality down there. But in Massachusetts, the way it's structured, and all investors who invest here know this, are all tenants have more rights than the landlord. And as a result of that, there are people who have legitimate hardships that need help, and good landlords will work with those tenants. I've done that many times myself. But then you do have people who are bad actors who want to game the system. And unfortunately, the way the policies are written here, they are empowered and enabled to do this at the expense of landlords. And so I think, legislators and people in government have a very difficult job to protect the vulnerable while simultaneously not allowing and enabling bad actors to, take advantage of landlords who may be struggling through this.
Do you think that there should be some ethical policy that every landlord should have available to a tenant before they actually rent your property? This is mainly like an agreement form that's stating, well, I pledge to abide by this, and failing to do so without some good reason, I should be subject to instant eviction or something. I just think that and I know this from experience because I want to be a person. I wanted to get myself a multifamily home for rental purposes. But it's a situation when I hear so many people complain about how their tenants treat them, and you start with a big mortgage, and that may be your only major source of income to make sure that the bank is paid every month. What advice would you have to give to tenants, like to homeowners like myself who may be thinking around that line?
So two main points here, Errol. Legislation and laws trump any contract you may have with your tenant. And so you may have this agreement, but it'll be viewed as unenforceable because the law trumps your contract. So unfortunately, there isn't any statutes that you can kind of put into the agreement that'll allow you to kind of protect yourself a little bit more than what the law allows. So that's one piece of this. The second piece of this is, as far as getting quality tenants in Massachusetts and not putting yourself in that type of a situation, you really want to vet your tenants. And so I talk about this a lot of the content I put out there, whether it's on YouTube or some of the things I've written over the years. You want to vet every tenant with the same process, with the same criteria. You know, just because someone has a Section 8 voucher does not mean they're good. Not all tenants are equally qualified to rent your home or rent your units or your property. And so vetting is of the utmost importance. And my most successful landlord friends have a very stringent process of vetting their tenants. You know, it's not easy to qualify, but at the same time, it saves them from a lot of heartache and pain over, you know, the course of being a landlord and having their tenants there. And so even still, occasionally one may slip through that doesn't fit the criteria or doesn't work out, but that's just par for the course. You know, anytime you invest, there's a little bit of risk. And then the third thing I'd like to this is the bonus piece. You may want to consider buying out of state in a state, you know, like Rhode Island, that is more favorable to landlords and has a little bit more protections for you. This is why a lot of syndicators who buy nationally don't buy in Massachusetts. They'll buy in Texas and in Florida and a lot of these states where landlords do have more rights and more support to protect themselves from tenants looking to take advantage.
Right. Do you believe then that in a place like Massachusetts, if a person is considering purchasing a multifamily home, that they should more rent this home at tenantry at will opposed to giving a 2 years contract? I mean, I don't know how enforceable it is to have tenantry at will, but that, to me, that may be the most easiest way out. And then again, if the law, it doesn't mean nothing much, then I don't know. Could you explain if that's a good idea?
Man, that's an absolutely phenomenal idea. Many of my largest landlords that I work with and our team works with at the brokerage, they only do tenant at will agreements, especially the ones who've owned larger portfolios for any length of time. You know, it gives that a little bit more flexibility and freedom that if it does not work out, you can both amicably part ways. Now, obviously, if they decide to stay, there still is that process of working through the legal system to get them out and to evict. However, it definitely gets you to the finish line a lot faster in terminating that relationship versus having a 1 year lease, because you have 12 months and it doesn't work out after the first 3, you're still stuck another 9 before you can effectively really get them out of there. You know, if they do continue to pay or pay partially and things of that nature. So tenant at will agreements do work well. I think it also, though, you have to think about the financing side. For my newer investors who are buying now, they have to have leases in place to justify the acquisition cost because the market's appreciated so much and they're buying these larger assets. We just had one buyer, he bought a 62 unit portfolio for like $12.6 million. And he needed to have those leases in place in order to get the financing. So I think that's kind of the double-edged sword of it, is if you're just getting in that first year, you know, you definitely will, hopefully will have some good tenants you inherit. If it's vacant, then great. You know, you may not have to go the 1 year lease, but if it is occupied, banks want to know they have the security that you can pay that note on these multifamily investment properties. So that's kind of the two sides to the story. But yes, tenants at will agreements do work well for my most experienced landlords that I work with.
Great. So therefore, here, if considering buying a multifamily home, would you, well, let's say an apartment building is just an example. Would it be best to have one already that has full occupancy? Would that meet the bank expectation more, or having to look for tenants to put in your building?
Ideally, you want full occupancy if you're primarily looking at it from the investor's perspective. But you want to make sure that through your due diligence process, you meet with the tenants, you talk to them, you get a estoppel certificate showing that they're current on rent, showing that they have security deposits or last month's rent paid, so that you can at least create and be diligent about making sure they're as good tenants, that they're going to pay and that they qualify. Some investors do prefer to have a vacant, and in those instances, it's because they kind of already have tenants in mind, or they have a strategy they want to bring to the deal. But most investors would prefer to have it turnkey, as long as it is not under rented. We have a deal we're trying to put together right now for a 16 unit in Chelsea, Massachusetts. And the struggle there is this landlord's owned this for 40 years, literally 40 plus years. And his rents are well below market. And he has no need to have to rent the property at market rate to make a very good return. However, he's about, I'd say, 40% under rented as far as the amount right now. And so he's struggling to sell it at the number he wants because his rents are too low.
So what percentage, if a person going into buying an apartment building, that they have to satisfy the bank with before qualifying for that loan?
The minimum amount you could qualify for to buy a multifamily, let's say a 3-family to 6 unit, minimum is 20%. In some instances, they want 25 or 30%. But minimum will be 20% down to get into the game.
All right. And none of them at this juncture, even if the person's credit is good, they don't get 100% financing.
Those days are long gone, man. 2008, that financial crash, they took those 100% financing products right out of the marketplace. So, yeah, unfortunately, you got to save, you got to beg, you got to borrow, friends and family, you got to figure that piece out, if you don't have that full amount. But it's definitely worth it in the end if you're looking to build passive income and wealth through real estate acquisition.
Right. So it may be better than just a family just coming together and joining together and just buy a multifamily home, and they just pay that mortgage when the month come, opposed to be depending on tenants. And as I said, that's just here for Massachusetts, because other places, as you just mentioned, are more favorable for the landlords opposed to the tenants. It's a long-term risk in terms of buying these properties for investment. And I think if you're going to be successful, it may be just best to have a family. I don't know, this is my opinion. Have a family come together, buy a multifamily property. They hold one part, you hold the next. Maybe just rent out one wing of the building if it's 3-family home. I don't know. But it seems to me that here in Massachusetts, it doesn't favor the landlords too much. And your advice, how would you go ahead and nourishing and advise investors' mind and buying a multifamily home, considering these issues that they may be faced with from a long-term standpoint? So,
Earl, as far as the comment about families coming together to buy these multifamily assets, that's something we see happen every day. We're looking at right now, we're working with a buyer who's acquiring a 30-plus unit portfolio in Boston. And his down payment and all his money is his family coming together to put up the cash to acquire this property, somewhere in the range of $9 million, these properties, I should say. But it's a family deal. You look at the largest buyers we work with, and it's syndicators. They're pooling money from investment groups and people from all over, out of state, and in some cases even out of the country, to acquire these assets. And I think that's one of the foundations of acquiring real estate in this environment, in this climate in Massachusetts, is pooling money together to get started. And then as the asset appreciates or as you get more cash flow coming in, now you reinvest that money. And, obviously you'll have a manager in place, a property manager, pay them a fee, and then you guys' first profits based on what everybody contributed. But, there's definitely lots of structures to make that work that leverage that. Now, buying in Massachusetts and these groups that do that here, I think as far as the tenants go in those situations, they're very, very diligent about just getting all of the paperwork for the last 12 months to show proof of payment, to ensure that the landlord isn't hiding anything or saying, oh, yeah, they're all good, they're all paid, but there's no proof showing that it was paid. Now, if they paid cash, you have to rely on the landlord's word for that. But in today's environment, most tenants are paying electronically or with checks. And so for the most part, it's pretty easy to verify if you're buying something that is going to be a stabilized asset versus something that's going to require a lot of work to get it where you want it to be.
Okay, in these last few minutes, you're the real estate dude here. You know the stuff. Just tell the public, though, how you can benefit them in terms of helping them purchase a home or sell a home or whatever the case may be, and how they can contact you, Robert.
Excellent, I appreciate that, man. First and foremost, thank you for having me on. I really appreciate getting back to this. I really enjoy our conversations and really just talking about the market and different ways to get in and invest and leverage, what's out there to build wealth and get better collectively. So my team and I'm the founder of Boston Trust Realty Group, multifamily investment group, and we do some development as well. But I guess the best way we can help people who are looking to get into real estate is through acquisitions and financing. We have an in-house mortgage lender. She's been on your show as well, Ann Rochelle Joseph, with us in the past.